I find it slightly amusing that it took DreamWorks one single movie to get right where Disney are still going wrong. And it's kind of sad when you think about it. Hello everyone and welcome to Rewind Reviews. And in this video we are taking a look at the live action remake of DreamWorks' How to Train Your Dragon. Released in 2025 and based on the novel by Cressida Cowell and the animated movie from DreamWorks. As an ancient threat endangers both Vikings and dragons alike on the Isle of Berk, the friendship between Hiccup, an inventive Viking, and Toothless, a Night Fury dragon, becomes the key to both species forging a new future together. Adapted and directed by Dean DeBlar, the movie stars Mason Thames, Nico Parker, Gerard Butler, Gabriel Howell, Julian Dennison, Bronwyn James, Harry Trevaldwin, Peter Serafinowicz and Nick Frost. I've got to be honest, when DreamWorks first announced that they were making this movie, I didn't know how to feel. I think I speak for everyone when I say that when it comes to live action remakes, especially the ones from Disney, they're usually nowhere near as good as the original films. They're not usually the best, and oftentimes they do come across as soulless cash grabs. Sure, in my opinion, I do think that there have been some good ones, but I don't think that any of them have been as good as the original animated films. So yeah, despite everything that I was seeing and hearing about this movie in particular, I was still quite skeptical, but I held out hope that this might actually turn out great. So I went to go and see this on opening day in 3D IMAX, which is a format that I didn't even think they still did anymore. And now having seen it, I can confidently say that this is more or less exactly what I expect to see in a live action remake. Disney, if you're watching this video, this is how you do a live action remake. Oh my god, this was brilliant, and it was so worth the format as well. The story for How to Train Your Dragon follows a young and inventive Viking called Hiccup on the Isle of Berk, where a war rages between his people and ferocious dragons. Hiccup defies centuries of tradition and strikes up an unlikely friendship with a night fury he refused to kill and names him Toothless. And with his newfound knowledge of his fire-breathing friend, Hiccup develops a reputation as a dragon expert, which puts him in a tricky situation as his final test is to kill a live dragon, and he must decide to either embrace his heritage or protect his new friends. But things become much more complicated as a new threat emerges that endangers both species. So as expected, this is pretty much the exact same story that featured in the animated movie. And yeah, in many respects, it does feel familiar. It feels like a copy and paste remake with lots of shots, lines of dialogue, whole sequences, and even musical cues being the exact same as the animated movie. And to me, this is the biggest letdown of this movie. It does lack the freshness or originality of the original film. But that being said, it does remain faithful and it is respectful. It hits all the same beats and notes as it should. It doesn't try to change things. It doesn't try to improve anything or add anything unnecessary. Sure, in some instances, it does expand on a few things. I mean, the runtime for this movie is 2 hours long as opposed to the runtime for the original animated movie, which is 1 hour 40. This does have a few extra sequences that help develop the characters and world building a bit more, but they only add things into this movie when and where they can. They don't just throw in a load of subplots and side quests, they focus on what's important. I have seen some reviewers on YouTube say that this feels like the original animated movie but with all the deleted scenes added in. And yeah, I would say that feels accurate. The story is once again brilliant and very well told. Even with the longer runtime, it is paced out nicely and allows the story to play out naturally. It doesn't rush to the stuff that you want to see, it plays out as it should. So when the bigger, more emotional moments happen, they hit. And I did admittedly find myself tearing up a few times. And it certainly helps that the writer and director of this movie is the same person who co-wrote and co-directed all 3 of the animated films. And it turns out that he's also the co-writer and director of the original Lilo and Stitch, which I'll admit I had no idea. He understands this story, he understands the world created by Cressida Cowell in the books, even though admittedly both this and the animated films are quite different to the books. And above all, he understands the characters. All of the characters that appear in this movie go through the exact same arcs and developments as their animated counterparts. There isn't too much that has been changed about what it is that they do and how they fit into the overall story, minus the odd addition here and there. Some of the characters that didn't get a lot of development in the original animated movies do get some expansion in this one, especially when it comes to Stoic, Snotlout or Astrid, who get a bit more development in this, which I really did like, and it helps flesh them out a bit more. Plus, when it comes to Snotlout, it does add some slightly dark humour when it depicts his relationship with his father. It's just this running joke that they do sprinkle throughout this movie that can be quite funny, but it can also be quite sad as well. And then when it comes to the performances, every single person that has been cast in this movie does have some very big shoes to fill, and I honestly think that everyone does do a really decent job. Mason Thames really steps up to the challenge of playing Hiccup and brings him to life in a believable way. It is a great performance and he does do a brilliant job. Honestly, I think that everyone is on top form. Obviously, a lot of the bigger and more emotional stuff is in the sequel, and that is something that I am looking forward to, but even so, and even though it can get a little bit cartoonish at times, Nobody in this is phoning it in. They all give 100% and I think that they all do a brilliant job. I thought Nico Parker was really good as Astrid. I really liked Nick Frost as a character called Gobber, who was previously voiced by Simon Pegg. I thought the other characters that train alongside Hiccup and Astrid were very well cast, with Julian Dennison as Fishlegs, Bronwyn James as Roughnut, Harry Trevaldwin as Toughnut, and Gabriel Howell as Snotlout. I don't think they're as funny as the original characters, but I do think that they all have great chemistry and they all play their roles very well. Plus, we also see Gerard Butler as the only returning cast member from the original movies, and he is excellent once again. I do kind of hope that we see Cate Blanchett reprise her role in the next one. I think that would be cool. Honestly, everyone does extremely well with their roles. I think that everyone was very well cast for who it is that they play, and I think that everyone does do a pretty decent job of being able to echo their animated counterparts and also making each of their roles feel like their own. Personal preference, I will always go for the animated movie, but I do think that everyone does do the best that they can. And this even extends to the overall look of the characters as well. The costumes and the overall aesthetic of each of these characters I do feel has been translated very well and adapted very nicely into this much more grittier aesthetic. They still look and feel like those original animated characters, but they do also feel a bit more realistic. The production design, the sets and locations that the characters visit are absolutely fantastic and they help sell that this place exists. Honestly, I'm amazed how much of this was real. If you don't believe me, have a look at some of the behind the scenes videos. It's spectacular. I'm even more surprised finding out that they used puppetry to help bring the dragons to life. Even though you don't see any of the puppetry on screen, it does give the actors something to react to. But obviously CG is utilised to bring the dragons to life, and I do feel like how they have been brought to life in this movie, they do feel very realistic and they do feel like actual creatures. All of the dragons that appear in this movie are the exact same ones that appear in the first animated movie, and they look spectacular. In this movie, they are way more ferocious and scary, especially for the opening half of the film, and they are so cool. And as for how they look, despite getting a slight makeover, they are pretty much the same as their counterparts. And I've got to say, how they're translated and adapted into this much more realistic world is very good. I was so close to saying their animated counterparts. Hey, people still call the 2019 remake of The Lion King the live-action remake, even though the whole thing is completely CGI. Anyway, and as for Toothless, I think they've adapted him incredibly well. He's ironically not quite as animated or as expressive as his counterpart, but his personality is still there. He still looks exactly like Toothless, and he's just as lovable. Good work all round. I am a little bit curious why the scene where Toothless fights over food with the little dragons has been cut. It's the scene where Hiccup realises that dragons are not fireproof on the inside and he realises that they're not all bad. That is kind of an important scene to cut, especially when you factor in what happens during the finale. So I don't understand the reasoning behind that. But outside of that, I think they absolutely nail Toothless. The other thing that I think they nailed is easily the flight sequences. Let me remind you that I went to go and see this in 3D IMAX. Oh my god, these were the sequences that I was most looking forward to seeing on the cinema. This is the reason why I chose this format to see it in, and I was not disappointed. These sequences are so thrilling and exhilarating in equal measure, with brilliant cinematography and top-notch effects work. Absolutely flawless, no notes. Honestly, if you are planning to see this movie in cinemas, try and do it in IMAX if you can. It is so worth it. When I went to see this, the screen that I saw this in was mostly full. There was a load of people around me, and just before the first flight sequence was about to begin, the bit where they're starting to fly over all the rocks and everything, there was a woman a few seats away from me who got up to go to the loo literally just before this sequence was about to take place, and she walked past and I'm thinking, the scene that we're all in this screen to see is about to begin. Where are you going? And she missed the whole thing. And don't forget that this is the movie that kicked Mission Impossible off the IMAX screen, so believe me, it is worth it. I don't think it's anywhere near as spectacular as Mission Impossible was, but it was worth it. Anyway, and as for the rest of the visual effects in this movie, to be completely honest, they look amazing. There's admittedly a few green screen moments and literally only 1 or 2 moments with Toothless where the CG is noticeable, but outside of those, I hand on heart would honestly say that these are some of the best effects that I have seen so far this year, at least in a CG heavy movie. And finally, John Powell returns to compose the soundtrack, and it's just as brilliant. For those that don't know, John Powell was the composer for the soundtracks to all 3 How to Train Your Dragon movies, and the director was adamant that he needed to come back to do this. He wanted to make sure that this still had the feel and the sound of the originals, because quite rightfully, those soundtracks are the sound of Berk of How to Train Your Dragon. You cannot think of these movies without hearing those themes. The soundtracks to these movies are just as memorable as the characters or the stories, and in terms of how the soundtrack is used in this movie, it is still powerful. It is still iconic, and I think that it sounded brilliant. And I will admit, during a few sequences, I may have shed a tear or two, and a large part of the reason why was because of the soundtrack. It sounded fantastic, it feels big and epic, and I think that it sounded and suited this movie incredibly well. There is a few bits that are a little bit different to the animated movie, but even so, this version of the soundtrack was fantastic. And even though I do this for every movie that I see the first time, I was more than happy sitting through the credits just to listen to the music. There is a little post-credit scene right at the end of the movie, but it's not too important to see. It's just like a little teaser that there's more adventures on the way. Overall, while I can't say that this is flawless, I can say that this might be the best live-action remake of a 3D animated movie so far. It does have the heart and soul of the original while finding a few new things and dynamics to explore. The cast, production design, special effects, music and more are brilliant, and I loved seeing how well realised this world was. It is a very familiar movie, and yes, I do agree that a remake so soon was not necessary, but I can't deny how much I enjoyed this. I don't think that this is a must-watch movie, but I do think that fans of this franchise, as well as families, should check it out. I think you will be pleasantly surprised with this, and if you do see it, make sure, if you can, to do this in IMAX. It really was worth it. As I said, I really enjoyed this, and I am happy how it turned out. So with all that being said, my rating for How to Train Your Dragon 2025 is an 8 out of 10. Well, that is pretty much everything I want to say for this video, so if you have watched this video, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy this content, please be sure to like, subscribe and hit that notification button. If you have seen the live action How to Train Your Dragon, let me know down in the comments what you think about it. Plus, if you have any suggestions for any future Rewind reviews or recommendations you would like to see me do in the future, let me know down below. And let me know which movie in the series is your favourite. Also, I do want to briefly mention something very significant that happened to this channel quite recently. Within the past week, this channel has managed to pass over 500 subscribers. And there isn't an awful lot that I can really say about it, except thank you for every single person that watches these videos, every single person that has subscribed, has commented, has liked, has lent their support. Thank you so much for every single bit of support that I have received for this channel. I am so grateful and I appreciate it all. Thank you, every single one of you. And once again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. See you guys.